Welcome to Think Bigger Voices, hosted by Jennie Treby and co-produced by Tony DiBenedetto. We're on a mission to break the cycle of poverty for kids in America by inspiring education, advocacy, and action in our communities. We'll tackle big subjects, talk to the experts, and promote the solutions making an impact. Join us if you believe that every kid deserves the opportunity to think bigger.
Hi, I'm Jennie Treby. Thank you for joining Think Bigger Voices. And today we're in our brand new studio, and I'm really excited about today's topic. We are talking about student aid. 87.3% of first-year undergraduate students in the United States receive some form of student aid. Our guest today is a student aid advocate and expert. Her name is Ms. Nadine Bailey. She's the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Ultimate Medical Academy. Welcome, Nadine.
Thank you, Jennie. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you. I should also mention that Nadine is a Think Big mentor, and we have called on her many a time to help us do some navigation of emergency financial aid applications for our students. So we're really thrilled to have you. So start by telling us a little bit about you and your role and your expertise and advocacy for financial aid.
So my background, just a quick story, because everyone always asks, how do you get into financial aid? And you don't really aspire to be a financial aid advisor, but most of us have fallen into it and then fell in love with it. So that's probably where my passion comes from. Because when I was going to university, my financial aid was a hot mess. So I kind of wanted to help those who didn't know what they were doing. Currently, I am at Ultimate Medical Academy, UMA for short. We are an allied healthcare school. We do have a brick and mortar in Clearwater, and then we have an online presence with about 15,000 students across the U.S.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more, though, about your experience with FAFSA, and if you wouldn't mind letting us know what FAFSA stands for.
Sure. So as a financial aid advisor, and I've been doing this for a little over 20 years, I've become very passionate and trying to help students and their families apply for financial aid and just find different ways to help them. So through advocacy programs or the associations that I belong to, so there's one in Florida, so it's the Florida Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, FAFSA for short, and that's a different FAFSA. And then there's a regional one, so it's SASFA, and then a national one, NASFA. So they're all like-minded, financial aid people from various schools, communities across the country, trying to advocate on behalf of our students and families for financial aid. And the FAFSA stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Keeping in mind the first word is free, so never apply or pay for a financial aid application. Okay. You never have to. So if you see something that says $75, it's the wrong site, back out of it.
Okay. So FAFSA is a federal program then. So just to kind of give us a little bit of an understanding, when did FAFSA start, or what's the origins of FAFSA?
Sure. So back in 1965, which seems like a very long time ago, the Higher Education Act came out, and that's where the program's begun. So there's a few, they've had some iterations throughout the years, but where we are right now, we have grants programs and loans programs. There's two well-known grants under the federal program, so the Pell Grant and the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, so FSEOG for short. Those are two grant programs that fall under the federal guidelines and things like that. Grants, of course, are aid that you do not have to pay back. And then also under the federal student aid system are loans. So there's two different types of loans that people might be familiar with, and it's a subsidized direct Stafford loan or a unsubsidized loan. And the difference between the two is the subsidized loan is a need-based loan, and while the students are in school, they do not have to pay interest on that. And then for 6 months after their last day of attendance or graduation, there's a grace period. So there's no interest or no payments required until they go into repayment, and then the interest begins to accrue. The unsubsidized loan is very similar, but there is interest accruing once you take out those loans. You do have a 6-month grace period where you're not required to make payments, but you can make interest-only payments to help reduce the costs. And then the payments will begin and the interest is accruing on that.
So how do you get one versus the other?
So that's where the FAFSA application comes into play. So once all that information is calculated and things like that, the institutions get a report. So it's an output of the FAFSA, and that determines each student and their family's eligibility for aid.
How else do people get to college from a financial perspective?
So they're on top of the federal student aids that are available. There is one other loan under federal student aid, and it's a Parent Plus loan. So it's a loan that the parent can take out towards the child's education. So that goes to any education-based charges like tuition. It could go to living expenses like dorm and things like that. So the parent can take that loan out. It's a little different than the other two loans that I just explained, but there's more information online from that perspective. And then there's also for students who might be a military family, there's military aid. There's also scholarships. So there's external scholarships, and then there's actually internal scholarships that some institutions might have. And then one other federal program is the Federal Work Study Program, and that's where students who are eligible can either work on campus or off campus, and the funds for their pay come from the federal government.
Okay, so there's just a lot of sources.
Yes.
Not to mention too, then there's also the 529 plans, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That if the parent can kind of be saving ahead of time for the student. So understanding all these complexities, that's really overwhelming.
It is. And that's why I try to help as much as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we all kind of have heard and seen that student loans can get a bad rap, right? Mm-hmm. Are they a necessary evil, or are they a bridge to the future, or is it a little bit of both, in your opinion?
I think it's a little bit of both. I do think people have had problems with the student loans because of the repayment aspect of it, not necessarily while they were in school, and it helped cover their costs. So it is a loan. It does have to be repaid. And depending on how much you borrow, it could be a hefty bill right out of school after you've graduated and you're starting your career. But there are various repayment programs that the federal government has, so to help you. So there's graduated programs where you might start making like payments of as low as $50 a month, and as you grow in your career and you're making more money, then the payments would increase. There's also so the student loans, when they're first go into repayment, you have 10 years to repay them, but you can extend that and apply to have it either extended to 20 years or 30 years. It depends, like when you reapply for that and to get it extended. And then there's also just some that are based on your income, solely based on your income, and you may not make payments initially until things change.
So you could be an undergraduate student or a graduate student and have multiple sources of financial aid, basically.
Yes, definitely.
So how do you help a student and their family potentially navigate all of this?
Well, Department of Ed has actually really come up with some great resources online. They have a YouTube channel, and there's everything you could possibly think about or have questions about completing the FAFSA and financial aid. There's a YouTube channel for that. And there's also links on their website. And they have done a great job of explaining the process, what you need to do even before you create your user ID and things like that, what documentation you should have available. Of course, know your social security number, have a parent, and things like that. So they've done a great job over the years of explaining it more, as opposed to just fill out this form. And of course, depending on the college that you're at or your high school counselor can help you, provide you with more resources or some answers to your questions.
I know that there was kind of almost a debacle, if you would call it that, of students trying to apply and applications not coming through and students not being made aware of whether or not they got the funding. Can you walk us through what happened?
Sure. I'll try. So we go back about 4 years ago, in the end of 2020, a new bill was signed in. It's called the FAFSA simplification. So prior to that, there were a lot of grumblings from both sides. So not just the government, but from the students and their families, as well as the colleges, because the FAFSA application itself was complicated and it was long. And so the senator in Tennessee was trying to get it shortened, and that's where that bill was signed in December of 2020. And that started the process. But what happened was, because it was so complicated in how it's calculated and things like that, it took the Department of Ed a long while to get it all worked out. So when it was supposed to be launched in October 1st of 2023, but because the systems and things like that weren't working yet properly, they did a soft launch December 31st of 23. And then in January, they opened it up, but then there were so many errors that they had to stop. They would hey, it's open, apply, and then they'd have to take it back and say, no, hold on, and things like that. So there was families, and they all know this is the time to do the FAFSA, but they didn't have access to it. And then once it was open and working, so when the institutions get their student information report from the process FAFSA, they were discovering that the information was either missing or incorrect. There's now the ability to draw in the income and information from the taxes, and some of that wasn't working, so those two systems weren't talking properly. And then the one big thing I think that impacted our industry as well was to determine Pell Grant and subsidized loan eligibility from a need-based perspective. It was a calculation that it was called the expected family contribution, so EFC for short, and based on that EFC number would tell us whether or not a student's Pell eligible and things like that. Well, they went away from the EFC and came out with a student aid index, SAI, and that calculation was completely different. So they had to put that in the system. Well, there was a lot of quirks. There was a lot of issues with that.
Oh my gosh.
So we'd get all this information. It's hey, that's not right. This is not calculating right. So they had to reprocess ICERs or FAFSAs and things like that. So it led to a huge delay, because typically families are making decisions about college in early spring. Some students have early acceptance, but in the early part of the year, they're trying to make a decision on where they want to send their child to school. Well, schools weren't able to even give them award notifications and saying, this is what you're eligible for if you attend our school, and this is what it covers. Some schools were delayed until May. California did not send out their letters until June, knowing that the fall classes start in August.
Yeah.
And if you're sending your child away to school, you also have to know how are we paying for the housing, where are they staying, how are we paying, what are we getting from a financial aid perspective. And a lot of families did not have that information and could not make that decision.
So what did that mean for the students? Did that mean that they weren't able to go?
Some of them did not go. So there was a huge decline in enrollments. And I believe it's a direct correlation between the FAFSA, I'm going to say debacle.
And this is across the board. This is across the country.
Yep, it is.
Wow.
There was not, and it's not even any type of school. It was just if you're financial aid eligible, these are your pain points. And there was a lot more to it, but it was more from a financial aid advisor perspective, so I won't bore you with that. But a lot of families weren't able to send their students or their kids to where they really wanted to go. Personally, I have a colleague, and her daughter got into Howard in DC, but didn't find out until late May. And she's I can't send her now, because they didn't know what was happening from a financial aid perspective. So she ended up staying locally, which is fine. She did just remain in the state, but there were so many stories, and it was so sad to see. But on top of that, it impacted the funding that comes in to help colleges and things like that, because it is there. You still have to get some money in to help run the school and things like that. So with that happening, there was reduced revenue
to the school.
Yes. And unfortunately, I've heard of like layoffs from admissions and from financial aid because they didn't have the enrollments that they were expecting. So they didn't have the expected revenue and they had to cut costs somewhere.
And I think you were telling me before that there were cases of student aid professionals having to go to university presidents and say,
Yes.
I'm sorry to tell you, but our enrollment's going to be massively down this year.
Yes. And there was no true way to indicate like, we're going to have like these are the ones that are coming in, or so they're incoming classes, especially like for freshmen, you didn't know because they didn't know. So everything was in flux. And then there were other students, like they're continuing students, so like sophomores and above, that were still kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm here, I got through my first year, now what? Because they didn't know, like continuing. And so there was a lot more communication between the financial aid office and the administration, and it had to be, because you needed to say like, we're not sure of our incoming class. We're not sure of like how many are going to return because of this. And it's specifically due to this FAFSA delay. It's not that, you know, they weren't doing their jobs or they didn't get the information out soon enough or anything like that. There wasn't the input or the output from the process FAFSA wasn't coming in. If they had to make corrections, they couldn't. If students without social securities or their parents didn't have a social security number, they were telling them to do a paper FAFSA, but that process was taking 60 days. And so, and then with the system being down or all the errors, it was just, we were all in flux. I think that's
so it started like, so something that set out to drive greater efficiency, it wound up backfiring and instead creating this huge backlog and frustration.
Yes.
So where are we now with it?
Well, we're in a much better place,
okay,
thankfully.
Good.
So typically so the FAFSA year starts, from a financial aid perspective, starts July 1st of one year, ends June 30th. But in order to do that, in anticipation of fall enrollment. So in the past, the FAFSA used to be available on January 1st. And then years ago, they changed it to an early FAFSA, and it was always available October 1st of the prior year. So you knew like October 1st, you could log in and do your FAFSA, and that would help the schools make their offer notifications as far as eligibility and like this is what you could be eligible for in financial aid, and this will go to you like tuition and housing and all that. So, you know, families were able to make decisions early. Well, last year, of course, it didn't come out till December 31st. This year, they were saying they were going to launch the 25-26 FAFSA on December 1st, but they were actually able to get more fixes in, so they were able to launch it November 21st.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yes, there's hope. There's still hope.
Yeah.
So please go online and complete your FAFSA.
Yes, exactly. So what do you see are some of the challenges that especially economically disadvantaged students face when they're trying to navigate this whole process of not only applying to college or any kind of academy or trade school? What are they experiencing trying to navigate this process?
So I think, I'm sure the internet's more helpful than it has been in the past from this perspective. So financial aid's always had a negative connotation. So you hear about student loans and student loan debt, and it's in the trillions now, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like the biggest item, like from a governmental perspective. It's just, there's this huge amount of loans that are due. So people hear that and they're like, oh my God, I'm never going to do this. But I think if you fully understand and do the homework and understand the process, or talk to people, like there's advisors out there that are willing to help, I think you can figure it out. There are, like I was saying earlier, there are the YouTube channels now that do a great job of explaining things and breaking it down. But some of our first gen college students or like the disadvantaged, they may not have access or understand where to go. So
because nobody in their family's ever dealt with this.
Right.
Right.
So, high school counselors, as I've mentioned before, they're a great resource. We've partnered with them to try and help them understand this process so they can relay that information. And then there's a couple of networks. It's called the College Access Network. There's one in Florida, and there's a national one called NCAN as well. So it's the National College Access Network, and they are in the various states. But they've come up with a plan to help more students complete the FAFSA. So there's resources available through them. The Florida Association here has partnered with the Florida FCAN to even help. We've had FAFSA awareness nights where families and the students can come online, and we'll do we'll walk through completing the FAFSA, and then we have a Q&A open. And I volunteered before and answered questions like live, like as we're going through the whole conversation and things like that.
Do people attend them?
Oh yeah, we had over 500.
Oh my
Before.
gosh, wow.
So, yeah, it was well attended, and I was happy
Yeah.
to see that. And we try, as best we can, because every situation is unique. So there are some families that are not a traditional family. There are some students out there who may not be with their biological parents anymore. They might be under guardianship. They might be a ward of the state or something like that. So those scenarios, there is information available online to try and help navigate who should complete the FAFSA with you. There's a really good info now that like what constitutes a parent. So when a student's filling it out is like, do I put my mom or do I put my dad, or how do they figure all that out? Or do they put their grandparents if they're being raised by their grandparent? So now there's more information as far as who is defined as a parent from a FAFSA perspective.
But does who is technically the parent, does that impact?
Yes. So the parent's income is a part of the consideration for the student's eligibility.
So if a student's being raised by her grandparents, but that's not her parent, how does that work? So do they look at the grandparents' income?
No, so there's different things from that perspective. So, sorry, if they're legally adopted by the grandparent, then the grandparent could be on the FAFSA application. But if they're not, if they're just guardianship and things like that, there are questions on the FAFSA that will qualify, like, are you an orphan? Are you a ward of the state? And different things that change their dependency statuses. So whether or not they have to provide parental information.
What do you see as some of the things that we in the community can do to better support students as they're navigating this process?
Well, as I mentioned, there's a lot of information online, and I can send you the links and you can post it, but I think that's a good way to go. And then for the students who are interested, depending on the type of school they want to go to, so if it's a traditional college or university, do they want to go to a trade school, do their research and homework, and then outreach to them. The financial aid advisors are always willing to help if they can, and so they can point you in the right direction. We are more internet-based now than we used to be. It used to be a paper application back in the day that they would either have to take in or mail in, and it would have to get processed, and that would take a lot longer than it does now. So doing it online, you can get by the time it processes, it takes about 3 to 5 days to get back to the institution, and then depending on their volume, they can come up with an offer notification and let you know what you might be eligible for. So you have those avenues. But there's also Think Big for Kids. They have a great program. So there's people that you can speak to and say, hey, I'm having problems with financial aid. Who can I reach out to? And I know I've been able to help a couple just having that connection or knowing where to go. And if they're not sure, always ask and we can point you in the right direction.
That's great. Last question for you, Nadine.
Okay.
What piece of advice would you offer to a student and their family about starting the process of thinking about going to school after high school and what that looks like? It's
probably not one piece, but it's doable. So don't be discouraged, apply early, and ask questions. And then the one thing I forgot to mention are scholarships. So external scholarships, year over year, there's millions of dollars left on the table because people do not apply. Because they just assume I'm not going to get it, so why apply? And there's scholarships out there for different things, like you could be redheaded, left-handed, you could be first gen, so there's scholarships for first gen. There's ones for STEM, which is huge, so it's science, technology, something in math.
Engineering and math.
That's it,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So STEM programs, there's specific scholarships for different areas, and depending on what you want to study and where you want to go. So then that's outside of what the colleges or universities can offer, so it just depends. So do that research, and again, never pay for an application because then it's not a real scholarship. It should be free. And then do the essays and submit the applications, because that's the most important thing you can do, because the worst thing they're going to say is no. So, and you won't know unless you apply. So apply early, do your research, and apply for scholarships.
Great. All right. Well, Nadine, thank you so much for spending the time with us and giving us an education on student aid. And we'll make sure to put all of the links on our information on our website. That's it for our episode today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for spending your time with Think Bigger Voices. Visit thinkbigforkids.org/podcast to see more episodes, follow our journey, and stay connected.